Hey, welcome back, everyone. Just wanted to check if everyone can see the screen that I have up. Great. All right. So for today, I'd like to explore the topic of wisdom and compassion. So some schools of Buddhism consider the teaching to have two wings, that of wisdom on the one hand, and that of compassion on the other, like wings of a bird. And just as a bird needs wings to fly, we need both wisdom and compassion to fully develop our spiritual practice. When we have both, we're more balanced and can go far. Wisdom is our ability to see clearly, to see things as they truly are. And this clarity of mind, clear seeing, involves understanding the true nature of all things in the universe. And so that involves the understanding of uh, the characteristics of impermanence, the fact that all things are subject to change, that they arise and then they morph and shift and then pass away. It involves understanding that by nature, we're all connected. And so true wisdom involves this dissolving of what we consider to be a separate, fixed self, and to see that, this whole interconnected nature of all phenomena. It also requires that we see how to bring about suffering and a sense of unsatisfactoriness that arises when we try to hold on or grasp onto people and feelings and situations, thinking that they'll never change. And when we talk about compassion, we're talking about this the trembling or quivering of the heart that happens in response to pain or suffering. So this is a natural response that arises. We understand and see our interconnected nature. So compassion comes from understanding the interconnectedness of things. So when we truly understand that we're not separate, that what I do affects what others do, and vice versa, and we're moved to act with care and concern. And so when we develop this understanding of the world and this connectedness, compassion naturally arises. And Ram Dass beautifully said, what we have to give is who we are. When we are kind and forgiving towards ourselves, we are more relaxed and happy, and better able to be loving towards others. Compassionate action is a path on which we grow in awareness and insight. As we grow, we become purer instruments for change. And so this shows that both wisdom and compassion work hand in hand. So as you grow in wisdom, you also grow in compassion. As you grow in compassion, you also grow in insight and awareness and wisdom. And Masao Abe has said, in Buddhism, compassion always goes with wisdom. And compassion without wisdom is not understood to be true compassion. And wisdom without compassion is not true wisdom. Sometimes we think that, maybe we can practice one without focusing so much on the other. And yet, doing that could be dangerous. This quote that I found very useful by Fred Kaufman explains this. It says, wisdom without compassion is ruthlessness. Compassion without wisdom is folly. So mindfulness without the ethical intention of relieving suffering, so without compassion, can be dangerous. Because in the Buddhist tradition, mindfulness has at its core, as part of its definition, the intention to reduce suffering. And so mindfulness practice taken out of this ethical context, as we see taught today in many settings, doesn't lead to true wisdom. And one very clear example of this is the practice of mindfulness in the military, as currently taught in the military. So I'd love to share with you this very kind of shocking quote by this research institution that's military based that talks about the advantage of mindfulness in the military. And it says, war fighters are less lethal and less resourceful in combat when their minds wander and they're unable to fully focus on a situation. So mindfulness training, even for short periods of time, can improve focus in military service members. That is, they're able to keep their minds from wandering and have fewer lapses in performance during a given task. And warfighters need to be able to block out distractions and tune into their physiology to do their best in shooting tasks or weapons qualifications. Managing that mind-body experience of performance anxiety is crucial for being able to fire a weapon accurately and consistently. And so we can see that, this is wisdom taken, practiced without compassion. And wisdom without compassion in other contexts may manifest as, let's say, you tell someone the full truth, the honest truth, but in a way that's harsh, not considerate of their condition. Or maybe feeling that we only need to practice and focus only on our own liberation, with our hearts still closed off to others. And those are just a few examples. Now, on the flip side, when we have compassion without wisdom, this often leads to suffering. Because without wisdom, we might be creating harm in the process. Whether that be harming ourselves or the ones we intend to help. And so the wisdom of discernment helps us to understand the limits and boundaries with ourselves, with others, and to understand how we can best be of benefit. So when we practice compassion without wisdom, this can lead to burnout, what's also known as compassion fatigue, when we go beyond our limits and our capabilities and end up using up all of our inner resources and become personally depleted. And compassion without wisdom may start off as a good idea with good intentions, but then actually miss the mark on providing what the person actually needs. So, one interesting story is an example of this is the invention of the life straw. So, this invention, when it came out, was billed as a cheap and portable personal water purifier. And there were many different media outlets calling this the best invention of the year, Time magazine, or Forbes calling it one of the 10 things that will change the world. And so this was created with the intention that this would help, at least 1 billion people in the world have access to clean water, create a life with dignity, as the CEO expressed it. So this was an invention that was born out of compassion and with a very good intention. And yet what they failed to consider was the actual image and practice of sucking filthy liquid through this plastic tube that doesn't look too pleasant. And you have all these images of people in different countries bending over pots of murky water in contaminated rivers and sucking this water directly from the muddy ground. And the fact that it would do very little to end the fact that millions around the world aren't able to have running tap water to drink. And so this is just one little example of the many different compassionate acts that we have. But when they don't have full wisdom around it, they might have unintended consequences, including more seriously harm and suffering. Now, sometimes when we think about wisdom and compassion, it might seem like this big, massive endeavor. Reality, this lofty goal that maybe one day I'll get there. But I wanted to share one way of thinking about this that has resonated with me recently, which is looking at wisdom and compassion from a very personal level. And so looking at this from the vantage point of self-awareness and self-love. So self-awareness as a starting point for wisdom, and caring for oneself as a starting point for compassion. And so by focusing first on this personal level, it makes it feel more manageable for me, and is actually the most effective place to start. As you know how challenging it is to try to change someone else's behavior. We know that we ultimately are the only ones who can make our own decisions, in the same way that others, in the end, can only make their own decisions. And no amount of forcing or control can ultimately guarantee us changing someone else's behavior. So self-awareness is really about reflecting on and evaluating how we think, speak, and behave. We're investigating our intentions and seeing how well our actions align with those intentions. And then with self-love, self-compassion, this compassion for ourselves opens up our heart to others in a deeper way. And this allows for more genuine connection and greater understanding of our connectedness. And knowing that also it's very hard to truly love others if we don't love ourselves first. And again, this practice is about balance. So if you have self-love without self-awareness, that can turn into self-indulgence. If you have self-awareness without self-love, that can turn into harsh inner criticism. So self-compassion, self-care is so big and so critical. And it's not just about bubble baths and ice cream, but it can take the form of taking a break when we're feeling overwhelmed, saying no to the things we don't truly want to do. It may mean asking for help from the people around us and prioritizing the things that make us happy. And one practice to develop self-compassion is practicing sharing loving kindness to ourselves. And with such, it is a practice that can be hard when, let's say, we've made a mistake or done something we don't feel proud of, right? But to still extend that sense of care, concern, and gentleness towards ourselves. Now, self-awareness is really about being aware of what we're doing, thinking, and saying as we're doing it. So when we're washing the dishes, pay attention to that actual process instead of maybe planning for the next activity. Like, when is this going to be done? Oh, I have 10 left. Okay, now. And this comes about through our regular practice of meditation. Just the fact that we bring awareness to ourselves, to our current condition, not necessarily to do anything about it, but just developing that clear seeing is really what this is about. And so some things that can help us with this is to see if we can bring this awareness into all of our activities throughout the day. And to notice the nature of the thoughts that arise in our mind. Sometimes we can catch ourselves and say, oh, this thought that came up and that I'm entertaining, ask yourselves, is this bringing me happiness or unhappiness? Right? Am I feeling stressed, or does this uplift me? And once we first recognize the nature of that thought, then we have the decision and the choice to focus on the thoughts that do serve us. And this is a very necessary part of mindfulness practice. It's not just being aware of the thoughts, but it's also actively choosing where to place our attention. I wanted to offer this term, mindfulness. It's a term popularized by the Australian Buddhist monk Ajahn Brahm. And It combines mindfulness with kindness, creating kindfulness. And so this, you could say that kindfulness is wisdom and compassion in action together. And just to share a notable experience for me that happened in meditation, is that when I first started to extend purposefully greater kindness to myself during the meditation. So, when I'm sitting in meditation, I start to notice my inner critic and allow myself to ease up on the judgments about myself, how I should be in the meditation, the doubts, and placing it with a kind voice and saying, it's okay. You're doing your best. And even if my mind isn't quiet, isn't still, the fact that I made the time to sit and I'm actually doing it is already a gift. I've given myself. So I found that as I was practicing this kindness and this kind attention, what ended up happening was that I actually was able to settle down much more. And this allowed my mind to become more quiet and still. And so, perhaps this can be a practice that can be helpful as you sit in meditation. And if you tend to have a harsh inner critic, see if that voice of kindness and gentleness can make its way there and give you that sense of reassurance. So, with both wisdom and compassion, we'll be able to soar high and far. We cannot just be mindful without being kind to ourselves, and vice versa. We can't be compassionate, without being aware of how our actions affect ourselves and others. And so I'd love, with the time that we have, to hear how this is all landing and to see, what does living with wisdom and compassion look like for you? So thank you all for your time, for your practice. And how is this all landing?